Well, that doesn't matter. This one's for everyone, but in particular for the men, uh, for the brothers out there. Um, Men have always been the superfluous sex. We've always been the sacrifice. Um, it is in our nature. It is in the embedded in the very behavioural genetics of our structure, of who we are and what we are. So there is also a culturally embedded indifference to male suffering, and it's one best faced as early as possible in life. Um, I've observed it for many years and decades, and it's always confounded me until I looked at it in a particular way from the evolutionary psychology perspective, and then the history of it made more sense. We were the front line, always have been, always will be. Even today, 93% of workplace deaths and injuries are male. We take the most dangerous jobs. 99% of war deaths are male. The list goes on. Wherever it's particularly dangerous or arduous, that's where men are. And that's been our role, and it will probably, to some degree, continue to be our role for the ensuing future. And for us to be able to function that way, we had to be somewhat more indifferent to suffering, to our own suffering and the suffering of each other as men. Because if we're running around weeping over each other and weeping about ourselves, we wouldn't get much done. We wouldn't be able to. And society would have found that our species extinction would have been far more likely, and we would have joined all the other extinct hominids who are now gone. We're the only ones left. In modern times, where we have the luxury of leisure and contemplation and high education, we're able to look at this a little more in depth without the existential pressures of survival. Society has taken away most of the pressures for survival. We don't really need each other as much as we used to, by any stretch of the imagination. The big daddy state and the economy provide everything for us, and it's both a good and a bad thing. There are pros and cons to everything. And we don't that doesn't just change who we are or what we are as much as we might wish it could. It doesn't alter. There are some things about us that won't alter at all, and they continue to push on. They continue to drive us. And men have become aware in these times that society is, to a very large degree, indifferent. I mean, studies have shown for decades that mothers will take, on average, slightly to much longer. It varies enormously, but it is often, the average is not a small thing. The statistical skew is not small, but from slightly to much longer to respond to a male child than to a female child. It's probably part of the inherent conditioning that we have in our genes, recognizing that men went out and suffered much greater mortality rates, always have throughout history, had to do some pretty dreadful things too for survival's sake, and they had to die in large numbers. 50% of men never got to breed. That means they died before they could breed. That means they never got to have children or have families. 50%. There's far more female DNA in our human DNA as a total than there is male, because most men didn't get to breed. At least 50% didn't get to breed. And that's throughout history. So I guess there has to be a built-in indifference to our own suffering, both by ourselves but also from women too, because they had to get used to guys dying around them, their partners dying, their family members dying, their male family members dying fairly commonly. That was counterbalanced by roles, by the respect of strong hierarchies and roles, which provided some compensation for the much higher death rates, the morbidities, and the greater physical suffering that men were often forced to, by nature, to endure. But in these benighted times where we're sort of safe most of the time and we're comfortable most of the time, and we're no longer, grounded but also oppressed, it's both grounded and oppressed by existential realities that used to in survival, we're still operating on the same anthropology to a large degree, and it becomes ever more pronounced in modern culture. Men still are not considered largely. The world is largely indifferent to men. Our suffering doesn't mean much. It's just a fact of life. It's just the way it is. But it's much more noticeable in the modern world because, again, the disappearance of roles, the disappearance of the traditional hierarchies and the traditional cultural tropes that went with it mean that whatever benefits were accrued for men in terms of social respect and status are largely gone. We still have socioeconomic status and fame and celebrity and stuff, but most of the other forms of social esteem are gone. They don't exist anymore for men in particular. They just don't exist. But the indifference hasn't gone. So the indifference to male pain, male suffering, hasn't gone at all. And thanks to the more extreme leading edges of feminism for the last 50 or 60 years, male pain is derided. It's laughed at. Shoe on Head with her video recently clearly showed that, like the hostility to empirically demonstrable suffering on the part of men. And it's not to diminish female suffering at all, but it's clearly obvious that men are losing in terms of keeping up with societal benefit. Women are doing much better. That's a fact. It just is. It's no one's fault. No one's to blame, except perhaps government policies. But it's not some conspiracy. It's no malice on anyone's part. But it's something we need to address. Unfortunately, the indifference that is built into our society still, and into our anthropology to a degree, towards male suffering, is inhibiting us our ability to deal with male suicide. It's inhibiting our ability to deal with the double standards in the family court. It's inhibiting our ability to deal with many of the social problems that are besetting men. They're falling behind in the education stakes. They're falling behind now in income stakes across hundreds of cities across the world. It's not good. We all rise and fall together. We want a rising tide that lifts all ships, not just some. And that seems to be what's happening for the last sort of 25 years or more. There are ways of addressing it, and that's for another video, and there's certainly things that we can do. But I think one of the first things we need to look at is the fact that our society is, to the point of hostility, indifferent to men's suffering. And their suffering it's not man flu, it's real. It's statistically borne out in a depressing array of stats. And, a 10-minute honest Google search will show you, without any difficulty whatsoever, just how difficult it is for men, and how much more difficult it's become for men in the past 20, 30, 40 years, okay? We need healthy men, we need healthy women, we need healthy children to make a healthy society. At the moment, I would argue we don't have any of those things. We have record rates of depression in 2 out of 3 female demographics, record rates of depression and antidepressant medication use. We have teenage mental health epidemics, particularly with women, but also with boys. We have runaway failure in school, for boys in particular, it's not good, it's not healthy. And it to a large degree, it comes because we're transitioning to a society we don't even know the shape of. We're winging it as we go, and we're allowing the economy to lead us down a particular path. And in the meantime, we're still stuck with some of the anthropology that we've inherited it from our evolutionary heritage. And this video is about how we inherited indifference to male pain. And it doesn't work well at all in the current environment. It's actually devastating, and it will continue to cause massive problems into the future. Lots and lots of sad, disaffected men in society doesn't bode well for us. It frightens the living hell out of me. We don't want that. We need to address it, and we need to admit it's there to begin with. So let's do that. Let's have conversations about that. Does it mean we shouldn't talk about female issues as well and children's issues? Not at all. But they're all connected. All those issues, to some degree, in certain ways, are connected. And if we can't discuss male issues without being accused of misogyny and all kinds of other nonsense, then we can't actually address any of the problems that are arising because of this tumultuous times that we live in, because of all this transitionary maelstrom that we find ourselves in. And it's, again, it's not something that's entirely in our control. It's the momentum of history, but we need to manage it to some degree, and we do need to treat each other better. Oos.